Why don't we take a few minutes to introduce ourselves to each other, the churches that were represented, if and how long we've been doing clerk work and all that kind of stuff. I'll go ahead and start. I'm Donna Wells, and I am the stated clerk for the Presbytery, and I do for the Presbytery what you do for your churches. Almost all the same kinds of functions that you do, I do as well. I've been doing this in various reiterations for, believe it or not, coming on 21 years. So quite a long time. So Gail.
My name is Gail Knight. I go to Central Presbyterian Church, which is downtown Atlanta, across from the state capitol. And I'm new. I just started serving as clerk in October.
Thank you. Marilyn.
Hi, I'm Marilyn McCrary. I am a member and elder at New Life Presbyterian Church in College Park. I have been drafted to work in a capacity as an assistant clerk. Our clerk has joined us. That's Erica Calhoun. And so I'm helping her out.
Thank you, Marilyn. Georgette.
I'm Georgette Willix. I am a brand new clerk at Emory Presbyterian, and I'm so very relieved to see that Shirley Wright Davis is is pictured right underneath me.
Oh,
wow. Yeah. She's our new church administrator. So we're
an additional tie then. Great. Yeah. Thank you. Shirley Wright Davis, would you introduce yourself then, please?
Well, thank you. Good morning. Georgette is absolutely right. I'm a member of Trinity Presbyterian Church of Decatur, so I'm actually here supporting Tam. She is our clerk, and I'm learning how to be her assistant. But Georgette is absolutely right. This is going to help me in so many different ways because I am the administrator at Emory, so I get the opportunity to work with her. So now I know what to give Georgette when she's supposed to need it. And definitely give Tam some support because she handles, Tam juggles a lot at Trinity. So I'm just here to learn what else I can do to be helpful.
Thank you. Thank you. Mary.
I'm Mary Smart from Oakhurst Presbyterian Church, and I've been a clerk for, this is my second year, started in January. So I'm here I never took the training, and so I just wanted to, I had the handbook, see what was going on.
Thank you, Mary. Christy.
I am Christy Stuckert. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
I'm from Barnesville Presbyterian Church. I've been an elder for, I think, 16 years, but this is my first time as clerk, and I just started in January.
Very new then. Thank you. Linda, you're on mute.
I'm Linda Robinson, and I have been a member of St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church in Tucker since '76, and have been an elder several times, but this is the first time to serve as clerk. So I think it's the deadlines and the reports and all that have me intimidated.
Okay. We'll address those. Thank you, Linda. Tamara.
Hi, I am Tamara Stewart. I serve at Trinity Presbyterian Church Decatur, along with Shirley. I'm a ruling elder, and also this is my second year as clerk of session. So since last year was so unusual, I figured we can treat this like we can start it over again. So yeah.
Terrific. Thank you. Ginger.
I am clerk-elect at Good Shepherd Presbyterian Church, and our present clerk thought that I would be taking over in January, but because of all your reports that are due that month, she said, let's put this off for a couple of months, which was very thoughtful of her because I didn't have a clue what she was talking about. And I have never been clerk before. I've been an elder several times, but this is my first clerkship.
Terrific. Thank you. Erica.
Good morning. My name is Erica Calhoun. I'm from New Life Presbyterian Church, and I've been the clerk this is my third year.
So you could probably be teaching some of this as well, Erica. So a lot of this will be old hat to you. So Judith.
Hi, I'm Judith Paisley, and member at West Hill Presbyterian Church. And I've been a clerk for numerous years, over 10 years. And then this is my return to being a clerk, and it's been like about a 10-year absence from doing that position. So felt it was good to get updated on what changes have taken for clerks.
Terrific. We cannot see you. Is that intentional, or do you need some help with
No,
finding your?
Yeah, I did not
I think
do that.
I think on the left-hand side of your PC, there might be a little video camera.
Oh, okay, start video.
Yes, there you go. There's your
Okay.
lovely face. Welcome.
Okay, all right, a
Thank
little
you.
dark. Okay.
Yeah. And then there's somebody on the telephone. I'm sorry, I don't see a name.
I know, that's Beverly Hutchinson, Donna. I was trying to get in on the Zoom link and it kept sending me to registration, so I had to do it on the dial-up. So
Oh, okay.
you're not gonna see me. I don't know why. It kept sending me back to Chip's registration page.
Chip, are you able to help with that as we move forward, or?
I can resend the link and see if maybe that will.
Yeah, it was kind of odd. And of course, when I got ready to sign on my computer, it decided to do an update. So
I've just resent the link, Beverly, if you want to try it again.
So does she have to get off and then try it, Chip? Is that how that works?
I'll come out of my phone.
Okay.
Did she click where it says click here to join?
Oh yeah,
Because-
yeah, and then it sent me straight. I'm gonna come out of my phone and let me see if I can get back on. Okay.
Okay. All right. We'll see you in a sec.
Thank you.
If not, dial back in again.
All right. Thank you.
All right, folks. I think everybody is here, which is fabulous. So let me start out by saying this is going to feel very lecture-y to me because we're just going to kind of go over a lot of stuff, but I want you to know that at any point in time, you can feel free to ask a question, make a comment, interrupt. I would much rather prefer this be kind of a conversation, or if you have a situation when we're talking about a certain topic that you have a question about, please feel free to interject so that we can all learn together from each other. A couple of things you should have as clerks. You should have at least 2 things in your library. Of course, the current book of order. And these change every 2 years. The current one, I don't know, you probably can't see, it looks like this, but it's blue. It's 2019 to 2021. And what's interesting is that they usually change in the summer of the year that it expires, because what they've done is incorporated all the changes that happened at the last General Assembly. Well, there were no changes from the last General Assembly, so I don't know if they're going to change this book of order or not. So when I find that information out from the General Assembly, I will let you know. But right now, that is the current one that you should be using. And then you should also have the current Robert's Rules of Order, which right now we're in the 12th edition. It will seem very intimidating. Don't be intimidated, but as the clerk, you really should have that, and it should be passed from clerk to clerk. When you stop being clerk, it should go to the new one. So it basically gives you all those parliamentary rules. And for those that will find it intimidating, and I find it intimidating, I have a small little pamphlet that has some summary kinds of things about simplified motions and parliamentary procedure. And I have that at my office. And if you want a copy of that, just send me an email. And when I get back to the office in a week or so, I'll be happy to send that to you. Make sure you include your address that you want me to send it to you. That little booklet is mentioned in, I sent all of you this morning, and you may not have seen it, but I sent you the handbook that I've put together for clerks. And so that little booklet is mentioned in there. So that's what I'm talking about there. All righty. So basically what I wanted to do this morning is to kind of go through the general responsibilities of what it is to be a clerk, and then to highlight some of those items, as Linda had said, about those reports and things that when they happen in kind of the calendar year. So Chip is going to show us a document that is expanded in the handbook, but this kind of is a summary thing, and then that'll be my basis for kind of conversation as we move forward. Thank you, Chip. So this is a document, as you can see, I put it together in 2012, but I have expanded on it in the handbook that I've given to you. But it's really the basic kind of overall responsibilities that you have as a clerk. You're supposed to keep all the roles of the church. You're supposed to be the communicator with the congregation and the pastor, as well as the outside world. Any kind of communication comes to you as the clerk. You're supposed to be the parliamentarian, which means that you help the pastor in terms of if the pastor has questions about how to moderate and motions and things of that nature. And then the last one is you take the minutes. You take minutes of congregational meetings and you take minutes of session meetings. So those are really the overall responsibilities. And then there are some added things that go in there. Back in the day, there were these old-fashioned books that were the roll books. They were alphabetical, and they would keep people's names in there, and it basically had a whole record of their life as a member of the church. I've heard varying reports that for people that have those, they cannot find filler information for that anymore, and whether or not you can even buy the book itself. The last time I looked, you could buy it, but it's like $350 to $400. It's very, very expensive. But if you don't have it and you're able to get one, and I'm going to try to find out more information. I'm writing myself some notes here about how that can be procured. It is really worth it because it is a total cross-reference so that anything you need to know about any members of your churches is easily discovered, as opposed to digging through years and years of minutes to find out information. So I just simply throw that your way, but I can't see everybody on this Zoom, but pitch in if you do. Does anybody in this Zoom meeting, does your church have this book? You'll know what I'm talking about if you have it. Anybody? Nobody? Okie doke. All right. And of course, in our electronic age, even more has changed. And I will say this before we continue. A lot of people want to know if just having everything online is sufficient or putting it on discs or whatever. Obviously, it's fine to work with all your roles online, but I really, 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 really suggest that at least once a year, towards the end of the year, if it's all online and you don't have anything in writing, to print it out. And the reason that I suggest that is, number one, that technology may not be accessible in a few years. Remember those little hard disks that we used to have and floppy disks that we used to have for computers? Well, computers aren't made that way anymore. We can't read any of that information. A lot of people say, well, in the cloud, it may be accessible, and it very well may be. I don't know what that will mean in a few years. As well as if your church does ever dissolve, those records are really important to the Historical Society. And so they would like to have those to preserve the records of your church. So that's what I recommend. Okay, membership roles. The Book of Order changed, for those of you that are not aware, probably about 10 years ago, and it changed in terms of what's mandatory in terms of what churches have to keep in terms of their roles. So the first role that they keep are the baptized members. And these are people who've been baptized in your church, but they've never made a profession of faith. So a lot of these are children of the church, or they're young people who've not made their confirmation. They may even be adults who have never joined the church. It's usually not, but it's usually specifically for these younger people who have been baptized but have not made a public profession of faith in terms of their confirmation. This, and I'm going to argue, this is probably, aside from your active members, probably the second most important role that you keep. Because in our culture, in our society, baptismal records are still really, really important. I usually get requests from maybe about once every couple of months from individuals who were baptized 40 years ago in their church, and their church has been dissolved. And as the stated clerk, we have all those records once a church is dissolved, and they need a record of their baptism because they're marrying somebody in let's say in the Catholic tradition, and the church wants to confirm that they've been baptized in order to be married in the church. So those are really, really important roles. And if you don't have that record book that I was talking about, I really advise that at least every year at the back of your minutes that you write down all the people who were baptized, if they were children, their parents, the date, and all that information, because it's a lot easier to go to the back of minutes 40 years when your predecessors come looking afterwards. It'll be a lot easier for them to look at that back page to find that information than to dig through months and months and months worth of records, which we do. So those are really important. Then the next role is your active members. These are people who have been baptized, who've made their profession of faith, and they've been received into membership of the church. Obviously that's what you work with. And in our tradition, it's really important, if they are members, that they are recorded correctly, because if there's ever a problem, we have to be able to prove that they're a member of the church. Right now, we have a church that's having some difficulty with some people, and it turns out those people are not members. So there's nothing we can do in terms of helping get some specific kinds of order because they're not members of the church. That doesn't mean you don't have folks that worship, and actually in this new pandemic age, we've probably finding out that there's a whole lot of people that tune in and want to become a part of the life of the community, but don't actually join the church. That's something we're all going to have to figure out as we move forward in terms of Presbyterian polity. I should say, as clerks, a lot of our polity is going to probably really need to be changed and reworked and looked at in light of this pandemic, because a lot of the things that we've done back in the day is going to be difficult to maintain as we move forward in this new, whatever this new church is that's emerging to be. When the Book of Order changed, we used to have an inactive list. We no longer require that there's an inactive list. However, you may have one if you so desire. Does that raise your hand if anybody has an inactive list in their church? Because there are still a lot of churches who keep an inactive list. And like I said, that's acceptable if you have one. But that inactive list should probably be relooked at by the session on a yearly basis to see whether or not there's an opportunity for some pastoral care from the pastor or deacons, if you have them, to kind of touch base with those folks and see what's going on, and perhaps to see whether or not they want to become reactivated. They may have joined another church and you don't know about that. And so then you can remove them from your role. A lot of churches don't accept letters of transfer. So there may be lots of times when you don't know that someone has joined another church because they don't necessarily contact the church of where someone was a member. So, but those are session decisions in terms of this inactive list, whether or not they get totally removed or what you do with them. So that's why in the annual statistical report, one of the questions that is asked is, has your roles been reviewed? Because that's an opportunity to see who's active, who's inactive, if you keep such a role. And let me say, in terms of what constitutes an active member, that's up to your session. And everybody has different guidelines about that. There are some churches that say, well, if anybody gives even 1 penny, they're an active member of the church. If they come 1 worship service, they're an active member of the church. But other churches have much more stringent kinds of determinations about who's active and not. That's totally a session decision, and your pastor, that's a conversation when you review the roles, if you so want to have that with your pastor, if they do want to review the roles. And especially if you have an inactive list, how do you move someone from the active list to the inactive list? And that should be a set procedure and guidelines so that it's not arbitrary. So that's another conversation that the session should make a decision about. If we do have an inactive role or we want to remove somebody from the roles, what is the criteria for us to do that? It may very well be that there's a concerted effort to contact that person, a certified letter. Would you like to stay as a member of the church? Whatever. But that's a session decision on how to move forward with that. Then we have what we call affiliate members. And boy, at Central, Gail, you got a boatload. A lot of affiliate members are members of another congregation, or in Central's case, there's a lot of pastors who have affiliated with Central? How many y'all have, Gail? I think everybody's on.
Around 40.
40. That's a lot. Not most churches don't have that, but those folks would be considered affiliate members because they can't really join the church because as a minister, they're a member of the presbytery. But you might have somebody, for example, who you might have a husband and wife who the wife is the Presbyterian and the husband is Roman Catholic and really wants to retain that connection to his roots as Roman Catholic, but is involved in the life of your church, but wants to keep that affiliation in the Roman Catholic Church. So that person, he would be probably considered an affiliate member in your church. Sometimes college students who go away to college and they're away from their home church, they may affiliate with a church where they're in college. So they don't actively join, but that they're affiliated. Now, these folks can participate in the life of the church, but they cannot hold office and they cannot vote. But they can, they can serve on committees if you so desire, and they can certainly have voice, but they can't be an elder or a deacon. They can't hold an office and they can't vote like at a congregational meeting. Okay. Anybody have any questions about those particular roles? And if you do, just shout it out, because like I said, I can't see everybody. So just go ahead and let me know what your question is.
I have a question about the active members that are baptized. We have adults that come that have never been baptized, but they're not then put as a baptized member.
Correct. If they've not been baptized, then no.
But
and
if they come in as an adult and they're baptized as an adult, then they're just on the active member list.
They'll just be an active member, correct. And Mary, I'm glad you asked that question, because a lot of people don't realize that you have to be baptized to be a member of a Presbyterian church.
Right.
So if an adult does come and wants to join the church and that person has never been baptized, then they need to be baptized to become a member. In the same vein, the Presbyterian Church recognizes baptisms of other traditions as long as they're baptized in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. So we recognize baptisms from Roman Catholics, from Episcopalians, Methodists, Lutherans, Disciples of Christ, UCC. So they do not have to be rebaptized if they join the church. We recognize their baptism. Hence, that's why, going back to what I said before, those baptismal records are really important, because perhaps your pastor wants to see that they were indeed baptized. All righty.
In the name of the Trinity and with water.
And with water. Thank you, Chip. Yeah, I think Joy Fisher, a congregation consultant, and we were doing a class for a person who's looking to be a commissioned ruling elder on the sacraments. And she was telling the story about how in our church that there was a couple there, and the minister went to do the baptism, and there was no water in the baptismal font. And so now, if it were me and I was a pastor, I'd say, we're going to pause, go get some water. But they didn't. They did the but then they had to kind of redo the baptism with water afterwards, because it's really not official in our denomination unless you have water. Thank you for that, Chip. So, but yeah, feel free. One time we ran out of communion stuff at a communion service, and the minister and I had to run back and get more stuff, and said, we'll be back in order to continue. So, that's one of the things about flexibility, in the church. Deaths. Oh, I'm sorry. Did somebody say something else? Okay. Deaths is another role that you are supposed to maintain, and it should be the full name and the year of death. And I want to say this is not so much the case now, but it was way much in the case way back in the day. For example, if it's a woman who's married, it should not be listed as Mrs. James Smith. We really need to know who this person is. So we need to know that it's Shirley Smith. You can say Mrs. James in parentheses, but then Shirley Smith. So we really know who it is, because there have been times when we can't identify people because we don't have what their actual name is. And the year of death is also important. And again, I have found this interesting, and I would welcome anybody to say, one person that I talked to, they don't take off people off their rolls who have died until the very end of the year. And that was new information to me. So I'm going to put you on the spot. Christy, do you know what they do at Lawrenceville in terms of deaths? And
I don't know if we take them off immediately or not. I feel like we don't. Like we just had a death this week, someone who's very dear to the church, and I can't imagine we're going to eliminate them from the role right away.
Okay, that's interesting.
I don't
Anybody?
know.
Okay. So this is just my silliness. I mean, I'm just curious. So if they're still on the roll, like when a mailing goes out to everybody, is the mailing going to go out?
I don't know, because his wife is still with us.
Okay. Well, and that's obviously something. So yeah.
I'll ask Ryan tomorrow.
I just was curious.
Yeah.
I mean, you can do however you want to do. I just was curious about it. I also know of one church, interestingly enough, where the session actually votes to remove the person from the rolls. That was new information to me as well. So none of those things are wrong. They're just interesting ways of doing it. And so as the clerk, you should just know what the tradition is in your context so that you know what to do, since you'll be recording that information.
Donna, I moderated a session where the session actually voted to transfer the person's membership to the church triumphant.
There you go. Okay. So as long as you document all that stuff, then you can do that. So I that has been a learning for me. It's just been interesting how churches have done that. So like I said, none of it's wrong, but hopefully at the end of the year, they should somehow be removed from your roles. Marriages. This is an interesting category because before the rewrite of the Book of Order, this was a mandatory role that you had to keep. It is no longer mandatory. I do suggest, if possible, that you continue to keep this role, at least the marriages that take place in your building, because there may be somebody that comes back and needs verification or whatever. And because it is your building, that would be important. It used to be also that any marriage that your pastor officiated at, even if it was outside of your building, we were required to keep those roles. Again, neither one of those is required any longer, and it may be more difficult to do the list that your pastor officiates outside your building. But if it's inside your building, that's probably helpful, because the session has to approve that the marriage takes place inside your building, because they're the people who approve any use of the building. Excuse me. So a pastor can't just willy-nilly marry anybody that they want to inside the church building without the permission of the session.
Donna.
Yeah.
I have a question. My son, who was a member, and he grew up and joined another church, and that's fine. We removed him from the role, but he and his bride, who was also grew up in the church, they were married outside of the building, and Caleb married them because they were no longer members at that time.
That's not a problem. That's not a problem.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know if they could have, and Scott or whoever was the clerk at that point probably knew the answer to that, but I just know you would document if they were former members,
Well, if you were continuing to keep a list of marriages,
okay,
they would be on the second roll, one that your pastor officiated.
Okay. All right.
Because it wasn't inside the building, correct?
Right. Correct.
Right. Correct. Yeah. It's really inside your building and outside your building.
Okay.
One of the things about marriages is this is one thing where your pastor does have discretion. Your pastor can choose to officiate at any wedding that pastor is approached with. So a lot of pastors will marry people who are not members of any church. Some do it because they feel it's an opportunity for pastoral presence to maybe encourage people to get connected with a church. And some people do it because they've known the people and they want to do that. But that is something they do not need permission from the session to do. They may officiate at any marriage that they as a pastor feel that they're called to do. But if it's inside the church, the session has to agree to it. Any other questions about that? Okay. All of that, those role things are elaborated on in this booklet, this handbook that I gave you. So, and where this will come into play is in this annual statistical report, because that's where you record membership. And that report is done every January. And this is one of those reports that Linda was concerned about coming all at the same time. And this one is going to be more difficult again as we move forward in a post-pandemic, or as we're still working through the pandemic area. This report, I send you information, and I'm going to reiterate this again. I send it out January 2nd of every single year. I send out an entire packet. It's got all kinds of information. It's got all these forms, and it also tells you how to go and put your information in for your membership roles. And if you don't get that packet by the second or third week in January, you need to contact me, because I have mailed it. A lot of people say, well, I never got it. Believe it or not, the mail, they do lose stuff in the mail. I usually get maybe about 5 or 6 clerks that contact me but contact me in January. Don't contact me the day before it's due, where I've had some folks do it because they've just not realized. So I want you to put in your own mental head, and if you have a calendar, be on the lookout for the annual statistical report. So in January 22, you can put that on your calendar to be on the lookout for that. Okay. Your second primary role as the clerk is that you're the communicator with the congregation and with the pastor and the outside world. And one hope is that you and your pastor have a good working relationship, because you really kind of are a team. You help the pastor with items that, the session might need to deal with. You help the pastor with the communication that does come to you. One of the things you'll notice that if the office of the General Assembly sends anything to the church, and sometimes they will, it will always be addressed to the clerk of session. It's never addressed to the pastor, because that is your role as the communicator. You receive all that communication, and if there's any communication to be disseminated, then you do that. This is where you talk with your pastor about how do we help keep our congregation, how do we keep those lines of communications open? Again, in a new technological world, and I don't even have email on here because I wrote this, I think, before we consistently did email. Do you still have a newsletter? If you have a newsletter, are you in charge of putting that together? Who does that in the church? It may be the administrator that does that. And as the clerk, and that's in consultation with your pastor in the session, do you kind of put a summary in? This is what the session talked about last month, in order to continue to keep communication open with the congregation. That's just really important. It may be your responsibility to notify session members with the docket and the business that's coming for a session meeting. Sometimes, again, it's the church administrator. In your own context, you need to talk with a pastor who does what in this role. But ultimately, you're the person that is responsible. If I send things to the church, I have to send them to the clerk of session. So, and usually I ask for your apologies. I just send it generically to the clerk of session as opposed to by name, because I discovered that a lot of times clerks change all through the year. And so if something was written to Georgette, but Georgette's not the clerk anymore, then it sits there. And so it doesn't go to the current clerk of session. So so I'll apologize in advance if I send you any communication. It's just going to be to the clerk. So some churches practice the posting of their minutes of session meetings or summary of their actions. Who does that? Does anybody here on this call, do they do that on a monthly basis or however often their session meets? Gail, they do? Okay.
In our like e-newsletter, they do a summary. Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else?
Ours was posted, but it's kind of moot to do that now since nobody's in the church, so.
Right. Do they have like a newsletter or like a
Yeah, we do
monthly
a weekly
or something?
witness, so I'm gonna add that summary of a session meeting that I can add.
That might be something that would be desirable. Again, the whole thing is you want to keep the congregation, you want to keep those lines of communication open because, you know, a lot of times people aren't really sure what's going on. And so you don't want trouble to brew when there's no need for trouble to brew, but open communication is always the best. If there are churches that ask somebody to be transferred, those letters will usually come to you, or if the church administrator might deal with that. Our new church administrator, which one are you? I'm so sorry. Marilyn, is that you? No, not Marilyn. Have you, Marilyn, do you, I mean, do you know if you all send out those letters or does the church administrator do that? Do you know?
I don't know about the letters of transfer.
Okay.
I do know that we have a newsletter.
Okay.
And we have a sessions corner after that goes into the newsletter after their meetings, after their stated meetings. But I'm not sure about the letters of transfer.
Oh, okay. Well, and that's fine. Shirley, you're the church administrator as well as being at Decatur, right? You're the church administrator at Emory. Have you had to write anything yet? Has anything come?
I am the church administrator, but I'm also a rookie in that role as well.
Oh,
so
okay.
I have not
Okay.
done it yet. I don't know what protocol is.
Well, and that's probably a question for you all to ask your pastor who normally does that. Because some churches, it is the church administrator who will write those letters. But as the clerk, it's your responsibility. And then, of course, if the administrator does write those letters, you need to make sure you have the information so that you can deal with that person in terms of if they're being received or if they've left the church so that your roles are accurate. If somebody asks for a letter of transfer, you as the, again, as the clerk usually is in charge of doing that. You're also the communicator with the pastor. And again, that's working together on the docket for the meetings and all the information that goes to the session for their meetings. And when things come to your attention, then you need to make sure that the pastor is aware of it. Also, a part of the communication is, for example, you might get thank you letters from the local pantry. Let's say that's one of the missions in your church that you support the local pantry, and they may send a letter of thank you to the church. And so you would report that to the session that we received a letter of thanks from the Duluth Co-op for our contributions, so that that's formally in the minutes of the meeting, because you want to make sure, again, that you acknowledge those thank yous. Or sometimes as the session may direct you as the clerk to write a letter to someone in the community or to an organization in the community or something of that nature. So that is your responsibility. Sometimes the pastor may do it, but it is the role of the clerk. Does anybody have any questions about how you communicate? And do you have any ideas? Let me just take a moment. How have you all been communicating in this pandemic? Ginger, have you had an opportunity to know anything about that?
Our church does an e-news once a week.
Okay.
And that's how we, you know, I often wonder, and I'll have to ask our clerk, what are we doing about those people that, you know, some of our elderly people that don't have computers or don't use them?
Mm-hmm.
Because our communication right now is online.
Okay, totally online. Okay. Mary Smar, how about y'all at Oakhurst? What do y'all do?
We have a monthly newsletter.
Okay.
And so since our meetings are generally monthly, we put something in the monthly newsletter.
Okay.
We do have a weekly announcement that goes out. And so I'll have to look at that because I haven't been putting anything. They have a lot of announcements in there.
Okay.
The pastor sends out, but
so the pastor sends that out. So okay, right. Okay, okay. Judith, how about y'all? Are you with us?
Okay, yeah, I'm still here.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have a newsletter, but we do our bulletins on the internet, and those who do not have email, we mail out the announcements, the bulletin to them.
Okay.
And so they get communication that way.
Okay. I think that in this era, we're all discerning what news ways we can do to improve communication based on a lot of us now being as an online presence. And again, it is an important question. I'm glad that you mentioned that, Ginger, because there are some people that still don't have computers, and there are some folks that don't.
This is Erica from New Life. In addition to having our newsletter, we also have harvest teams where elders are responsible for a group of people, but we have it by birthday, and they reach out to everyone either, via email, calls, text messages. So that's the way we can, keep in contact in addition to our newsletter that we mail out every week.
Oh, that sounds like a great thing. And I'm glad you said call, because my colleague Joy Fisher and I, sometimes she said, you know what, we can really just talk on the telephone. We don't have to watch each other through Zoom. We can do that. So that is also a reminder that we can reach out to people on the telephone. So that's just as legitimate way to communicate with folks. I like that. That's really cool, Erica. Thank you for sharing that with us. That's a wonderful way of trying to keep up with folks. Anything else anybody wants to add to what they're doing in their church that might be helpful for folks to know?
Our Christian education person, Christian education and spiritual direction, I think is her title, I'm not sure, but sends out a list of joys and concerns every week of, so that we can keep up with each other. And we have a periodic newsletter as well. And the pastor, if there is something to be known, the pastor usually sends an email blast to the congregation.
Okay. Thank you, Georgette.
This is Erica again. Also a good opportunity for us is when we have our Christian education or Sunday school classes, with the people being on Zoom. So that's another opportunity for us to connect in a smaller group where we can see each other, with the cameras and have that conversation going on as well.
Oh, great. So you're doing Sunday school online then, Erica?
Correct.
Oh, cool. Okay.
And we're doing the same at Eastminster, Donna.
Okay.
On Sunday school, and have just started up a really exciting children's program that we're picking up some children that have not been a part of our church. But the other thing, we do a Friday night happy hour from 6 to 7 p.m. by Zoom. We have people that read poems or do music. I mean, it's been delightful. And we've had, 20, 25, some up to 30 people join on Zoom. Usually somebody, our music ministry person kind of coordinates, if anybody wants to sing. A lot of people with guitars and that sort of thing. So that's been a great way for the congregation to stay in touch.
That's wonderful. Love all this creativity that has come through in this pandemic area. Thank you for sharing that. Anybody else before we move on to probably everybody's very favorite role as the parliamentarian?
At Trinity, we have, it probably started shortly after the pandemic. So we've probably been doing it for about a year, but we have daily prayer calls.
How does that work?
So the elders of the church kind of run the prayer call, and it's every day, I think at 7:15. We do have one day where it's at noon. I believe that's on Wednesdays. But the elders kind of run the prayer call and people call in, and it started off as just an opportunity for prayer with kind of the uncertainty of what was going on with the pandemic, but it has evolved into being a time where people can just come together and chat. How are you doing? What's going on? Ask questions about something, that's maybe come up in service that they didn't understand. And so it's really become an opportunity for just coming together in kind of a different way, not just through our live services, through Zoom.
And how do you communicate that for that, to that folks, so they know like how to connect with that?
Well, for a while, because it started like I think last April 2020, every week the administrator would send out, here's the number to call, here's the PIN number that you put in. It was in the bulletin every single week. So just this constant, like, here's the number, here's the number, here's the number.
That's great.
It got to a point where we just really didn't need to do it anymore because most people know it, but I think it's still kind of at the bottom of the announcements. It's kind of like a small line item every week. But then also, so we're playing around with this coming Sunday, tomorrow, we're going to start our service with small breakout groups in Zoom, because we do our services through Zoom. So we're going to have small breakout groups, and it's kind of a random assignment of people going into the different rooms, again, with the ruling elder kind of being the lead in each room. And we'll have just another opportunity for people to express any joys, any concerns, any prayer requests. And then we'll have like a kind of a scripture that will be read, and a short conversation about the scripture, or a question of the day that will lead into the sermon topic. So that's something that it's new. We haven't done it yet. We're doing it tomorrow, and we have a meeting later today to kind of iron out some of the logistics of that. But just another way to engage, so people aren't just watching the service, but more so being engaged with the service.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tamara. And all these things, and if there are new things that your church is doing, or even other things, as the clerk, you can help your pastor figure out how are some ways that we can continue to communicate and allow people to know how to connect with these various things that you're doing. So that's kind of a new function in this virtual age. So thank you. All righty, parliamentarian. Chip, if you can scroll up for me, thank you. The first line is kind of funny, but it's also the same. And your job as the clerk is to make your pastor look good. The pastor, of course, is the moderator. And as clerk, you're supposed to keep track of what's going on, especially if there are motions, to make sure what motion has been made. Some of this is not as difficult if you're in a smaller situation, but like Central, that has a pretty large session. I mean, it may be a little bit more in terms of making sure that the appropriate thing. Your moderator might get lost in what's going on in terms of whether or not there's something to vote on or not. And so your role as keeping track of all that is to help your moderator when they ask you. This is one of the most difficult things as a clerk, and it's really hard for me because I like to talk a lot, and I like to, Chip can say it. Chip knows this about me. I like to give my opinions a lot, but it's the moderator's show, and you're supposed to not really address anything unless you've been asked. Now, if you are a current serving elder, and that's another thing, you don't have to be a current serving elder. You can be elected clerk, but that you're not an active serving elder on the session. If that's the case, you're really not supposed to say anything unless you're asked. You are simply there to be the clerk and to help with conversation and to help your pastor. And so if you are a current serving clerk, then you certainly can be part of the conversation, but you need to make sure that you remember your role as you're moving forward and taking minutes and things of that nature. So how many people as elders along with being the clerk? Raise your hand. I see a couple. So there's some who are not currently serving. Okay.
I'm sorry, what was the question, Donna?
Yeah, are you currently serving? Were you elected to a term to serve as an elder, or are you simply just being the clerk right now?
I'm a former elder.
Okay, so you're just being the clerk right now.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
Same.
So same with you? Okay. So if you are just being the clerk, then your job is to just be the clerk, and you're really not allowed to engage in any of the debate or any of the conversation unless you're asked by the moderator to give your opinion. Now, in smaller churches where we're all kind of family, that usually doesn't happen, but technically that's what your role is to just be there to do the things for the clerk. There are one thing in the parliamentary procedure that I like to emphasize is that if you are having a conversation or a discussion about a matter that might be controversial, and there are people on all sides of the issue, when the actual vote comes, if someone wants to say, I would really like it recorded in the minutes that I voted no, you need to respect that and to do that. It's important that people feel that they're heard, and that's not lifting somebody out. So, and I also think it's important as the clerk, if it really is a controversial issue, as you're taking the minutes, which we'll talk about next, but to expand a little bit on, this was an issue where we had a lot of discussion, where we had a lot of debate. And in situations like that, I would hope that you would record the numbers, like 4 voted against and 6 passed, as opposed to saying the motion was approved. Because you never know if that issue will come back to surface, and people may want to go back through the minutes to see what happened in that conversation.
When we have a motion approved, I've been putting unanimously approved or the number.
That's
if it
correct.
was not approved
Yes.
by some.
I think that's the best way to do it. It doesn't have to be that way, but I think that's the best way. But again, if somebody really wants their name added in terms of how they voted, that's perfectly acceptable to do that. There will be some things that might require a ballot. Usually within session meetings, they don't. But, you would be in charge of making sure that happens. In a congregational meeting, there would be times when you would have to have ballots. And as the parliamentarian, you would be responsible for having the ballot, and you would be responsible for getting the people who will be counting it. And you usually sign off on the end result of what the vote is, that you've confirmed as the clerk that this is an accurate reflection of the vote.
Are you talking about congregational meetings also? If there's a
congregation, yeah, go ahead, Ginger.
Mm-hmm. I can just think back that we've had like pieces of paper where we voted and turned them in. It's yes. The clerk's job to put that together and to count it.
The clerk should help oversee it. Now, let's say it's for the election of a new pastor. A lot of times the pastor nominating committee will oversee it, but ultimately, and I should probably convey this to the consultants because I'm not really sure I ever have, as the clerk, really you should sign off that it's an accurate count.
Okay.
So I think that makes it clean and kosher. I mean, they may do the counting and they may oversee that, but you're supposed to be a neutral party. And that's another thing that's hard as the clerk, because I have a hard time with that. You're actually supposed to be a neutral party in any situation in the church. People on both sides of an issue should feel that they can come to you as the clerk for advice on process or for advice on how to move forward on both sides. And so the best perception is to try to maintain your neutrality as much as you can.
Are you basically telling me that while I serve as clerk, I should keep my opinions to myself?
Unless you are a currently elected serving elder. Okay. Are you a current elected serving elder? Then
so I should not, all right, let's say they are having a controversial issue, mm-hmm. and I'm asked, should I say no comment or?
Well, it depends who's the asking. I think if the whole session wants to hear your opinion or whatever, that's fine. But
so in a session meeting, it would be okay, but out in the congregation,
it would not be appropriate in a congregation. And let me tell you why. Let's say, for example, the presbytery is talking about an overture. And someone comes up to the mic and says, I would really like to know what the stated clerk has to say about this overture. If it's information, that's one thing. If it's an opinion, you're a person that's perceived that could be persuasive in that argument. So that's why you're really supposed to be neutral. Does that make sense to people? It's a tough one. I have a real hard time with it. And I'm glad I'm looking at this because I need to redo this because the pamphlet by Marion Wolf has been replaced by the other pamphlet that I told you about. So just simply email me if you want this pamphlet on parliamentary procedure, and I'll have to redo this document to have the correct one. So anything else? I don't want you to get intimidated by motions and all that kind of stuff, but has anybody ever had a situation where you felt overwhelmed and you were not sure what to do?
We recently had an issue on reopening parts of our campus. At one point, just the parking lots on the exterior were reopened for like our Tucker Farmers Market and some groups at AA that used the parking lots. But another group wanted to have rehearsals in the courtyard, which was it was outside, but a different area.
Mm-hmm.
So we had a motion to approve that they could have the rehearsals. Then we had to have a substitute motion to open up all the outdoor, and not just the parking lots, but to all the outdoor spaces. And then we had a friendly amendment to that motion. And, it was just layer, and then, in seconds and seconds, you think, okay, between Camille, our wonderful pastor, and me taking our notes, we got it all figured out. But I had never heard of a friendly amendment.
Now you have. And for those that haven't heard of a friendly amendment is to a motion. There's a motion and someone wants to make an amendment, a friendly amendment saying, instead of 2 o'clock, let's make it 2:30. And if everybody agrees, then you can just do it. You don't have to sit there and go through all the parliamentary procedure to vote on it. It's just a friendly amendment that everybody agrees to add into the motion. But if someone doesn't agree with it, then you got to go through the whole process of voting on it. This is sometimes where our polity gets crazy. But the purpose of it to always remember is that the purpose of parliamentary procedure is to protect the rights of the minority so that minority voices can be heard. It's a really important piece of our parliamentary procedure so that people are not run over and that people have an opportunity to speak. And in light of that, I'm going to diverge, since we're talking about that, and talk about email meetings. Email meetings are illegal in Robert's Rules of Order. They are terrible theology in terms of Presbyterian polity. Oh, it's 11 o'clock. Is that when we agreed to quit? Thank you, Chip.
No, I was just giving you an idea.
Oh, you were just giving me a heads
up. You said to 11:30.
Okay. Oh, we said to 11:30. Great. Okay. Thank you. There are some. Part of the reason is our theology sessions, and part of the reasons that we have discussion is that we believe that the Holy Spirit works through groups. That's why we don't have a bishop. That's why we don't have a pope. We have groups. We have a presbytery. We believe that the Spirit works through groups. Well, in email, you're not discussing anything with anybody. So it totally closes off the ability of the Holy Spirit to speak through conversation and discussion. That's the theological reason why email votes are not appropriate. And then Robert's Rule says they're not appropriate. Some sessions, and I am not encouraging this, but I want you to know this, because some sessions are saying, well, if we have an email meeting, can we have an email meeting if we make very strict regulations about that? For example, everybody has to reply by Monday at 11 o'clock. If anybody has an issue, then it doesn't count. We have to have a meeting about it. So there are some exceptions if you want to make those kind of rules. But what's happened, I found out that a lot of people are just having general meetings by email because they're just doing that. Actually, this was before the pandemic, before we actually had Zoom. So it might even not be that much of a factor anymore. More and more having our meetings through Zoom. In a very emergency situation, you can, grace is better than condemnation. If the session informally agrees to do something in an emergency situation, then go ahead and do it. And then you record it as the clerk the next time you have a session meeting that this was approved. So, okay. And I talk about email meetings in my other thing. All righty, taking minutes. There are two ways that you take minutes. You take minutes as in session, and you take minutes for the congregational meeting. I would like to say that this is one area where you have discretion as a clerk in terms of how your minutes look and the format that your minutes take. But your minutes must include any action item. And I strongly suggest that includes information items as well. If you look on the paper that when we review session minutes, you'll see a lot of items, and those things have to be in your minutes. You have to put who the moderator is. And a lot of people say, well, it's our pastor. That's kind of a given. But especially churches in transition, it's not a given. So you really need to name who the moderator is. You need to name who is present and who is absent and who is excused. And that's really important for voting to make sure it's legal, because if someone ever challenges a vote, I've actually had people that have challenged votes, but they were never marked present at the meeting. So you obviously can't challenge the vote if you weren't present at the meeting. And your nominating committee might want to know that information, because if someone is consistently absent and doesn't call in an excuse for whatever reasons, then they may not want to be renominated. The nominating committee might want to say, does it make sense to renominate this person if they're kind of absent a lot and they don't even tell you that they're not going to be there?
How is someone excused?
They would let you know as the clerk. They would email you and say, I'm sorry, I got a sick kid. I can't come to this meeting tonight.
So
they should let you know.
job.
Yeah, they need to let you know. They can call you, they can email you. Sometimes people will do it after the fact. Oh, an emergency happened and I wasn't able to get there. Could you please mark me excused? Sometimes they'll let the pastor know. Hopefully the pastor will let you know, because you've got to record that in the minutes. So you should record all the names of the people who were there, all the people who were excused, and all the people who are absent. And then this is really silly. It sounds silly to people, but you have to declare a quorum. You know, some people said, well, if you show that everybody's present, of course there's a quorum there. But a meeting is not legal. Any business in the meeting is not legal unless you as the clerk have declared that a quorum is present. There was a little case that went up years and years ago to the General Assembly. It was a session of only 3 members. All 3 people were there, and they did this thing, business or whatever, went all the way up to the General Assembly, and the church lost because a quorum was not declared. So that's an important piece. And again, opening. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I hate to keep interrupting. How do you constitute a quorum in the congregation?
Well, in your bylaws should say what your quorum is for a congregational meeting. This was also changed when the new form of government was changed. It used to be in the Book of Order that a quorum was 10% of your congregation. It is now silent on that issue. And so I've been telling people for the last several years, you really need to find your bylaws, especially as new clerks. Try to find your bylaws and make sure that all the bylaws have what you need in there. And they should say what a quorum is. Some of our churches who are very small say 25%, because if it's 10%, that may be 2 people. So they want more people. Bylaws should say what the quorum is, and then again, you as the clerk would declare that there's a quorum in the congregational meeting.
Does it count if the minister declares the quorum?
Well, it should be the clerk, but sometimes ministers will just go ahead and declare it.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, but you know, you can just say as clerk, I confirm that, you know, in your minutes, you can say I confirm the declaration that a quorum is present.
Okay.
So if someone else is like the moderator or the pastor, then yeah. Okay.
have a congregational meeting by Zoom.
Yes.
And thank goodness, Scott, former clerk, noted every person that was there because it was, happening quickly on the computer.
Right.
And there was no way for me to participate, all that. Yeah, it was odd and it's stressful.
It is stressful, and we've had many churches do it. Chip, I don't know if you want to address any of that. I mean, because how we're doing it at the presbytery to declare a quorum and registering in polls and all that.
Right. I'll say a couple words about that. You can, after a meeting, if it's done on Zoom, Zoom will allow you to print an attendance report so you can see who was there. I know most congregations that I have worked with, they ask people to put in the chat box so that they can see it if there's more than one person on a device. So if my wife and I are watching the same screen, I would put in there Chip and Ann Blankenship are on this screen so that one participant in the participant list counts as two people for towards the quorum.
And also in terms of voting, if you're doing it again by Zoom, and if you've been to a Presbyterian meeting, you can actually see the actual numbers of the votes. So that's actually been really helpful for me as the stated clerk of the Presbytery to actually get numbers. Most things are by majority, but there are a couple of issues that have to have 2/3 approval, which, like changing your bylaws, has to have a 2/3 approval as opposed to just a simple majority.
Donna,
Hang in
I'll
there
also
with
say,
go ahead.
For Presbytery meetings, we've required one person per device. I mean, it's just one vote per device, but most congregations I've worked with haven't felt like they could really fairly do that.
So they are stressful, these congregational meetings online, but I think we're getting more used to it, and we don't have them that often. But when we do have them, then it's you just do the best you can. That's all we can say. Okay. All minutes must have at least one copy in paper. Yeah, that's my other thing, again, as I talked about in terms of the roles, is that you have at least one copy of minutes on paper. Also, because the archives will want all that as well, to know the history of your church. So in terms of taking minutes, does anybody have any questions about what should be in the minutes? I'm sorry, let me say one other thing. I had a couple of churches that contacted me, and the clerk was writing verbatim conversation in session meetings. Joe Smith said da 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 in a discussion, and Susie Smith said da 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 da. That's not what it is to take minutes. You don't write verbatim conversation. Number one, it can stifle conversation if people think that they're going to be written up verbatim. But your job usually is to do a summary of a conversation if there's been one, and clearly what the motion is, the second, and you do not need to name who the second is. You can simply say it was seconded. You can put the name in there if you want to, but it's not required. And then again, what the vote was, if it was approved and if not approved, and hopefully you can get a count. I think that's the most helpful thing to do, is to put a count in there.
The items that you've covered in these two paragraphs under session, are those the things that when we have at the end of the year, the minutes that are being read and reviewed, are those things that are being looked at for?
They are.
There are other things that in addition to these that we need to know about?
There are some other things. If you look at that paper, you'll see all the things, but these are the primary things. Okay. The authorizations of baptisms, because your pastor, the session has to approve a baptism. The pastor just can't go around baptizing people. The authorization of the Lord's Supper, again, the session has to do that. And you can do that. We celebrate the first Sunday of every month, and that's sufficient. You don't have to put it in every month. Churches that celebrate it less often, they should authorize who has put it in. For the authorization, let me backtrack, for the authorization of baptisms, it's also important if you go ahead and put in there later when the baptism actually took place. And again, that's why that list at the end of all the baptisms is helpful, because, Tamara might have been sick she might have been supposed to be baptized and it turned out she was sick that day. And so the actual baptism happened another day. So it's important to also include when the actual baptism took place. The financial report, and this is something that is churches are just really having a hard time doing. And a financial report is supposed to be done every year. And this is a report that's done separate from your treasurer and your finance committee. It can be an outside audit. It does not have to be an outside audit. It can be an internal financial review. This is a protection for everybody as well as for your churches. And I tell clerks this, you know, I've been telling them lately that we had a church that was embezzled of $400,000 a few years ago. This is why we do financial reviews. St. Andrews, as a matter of fact, has a great process for an internal type review. Marcia Nobles is, who used to be the clerk, has shared that with me and has encouraged me to share that with as many clerks as they want. If you would like that, let me know. And I review that also in the in our review. Again, you're supposed to be elected, and it's silent for how long your term is, so you should have that in the minutes. And the same with the treasurer, needs to formally be elected. It's not like, well, Joe's been doing this for 25 years. That's okay, but you need to elect him formally because he deals with money. And it's a protection for your treasurer, it's a protection for your church, that the governing body, as the session, has elected this person. So that should be in your minutes as well. And any reception of new members and your examination of new members. We had a great conversation when we were doing minute reviews online. I was asking people how they were doing all this during the pandemic, and they all had a real fabulous variety of ways that they were examining new officers in this pandemic context and before. So that was really interesting. So yes, I'm looking for all those things in your minutes on a yearly basis.
This handout that you're talking about, is that going to be emailed to us as individuals, or is it sent to the church?
It is sent in the annual statistical packet, but it is also available online on the Presbytery website. Under Presbytery meetings, there's a drop-down tag that says Clerk's Corner, and that form, I think, is listed on that as well. Yeah. And you may want to go ahead and get that and say, for example, some people like to follow along. So if they have it and it's like, oh, we elected myself this month in January. So you have the form right then and there, and you can fill it as you go along, as opposed to going back through a whole year's and looking through all the minutes to find the different components. Some people do that. You know, as the meetings go along. Another helpful, yeah, go ahead, Tamara.
I was thinking about doing that, but I wasn't sure. So that document doesn't really change year to year?
I haven't changed it in years because that's really what's required. So
okay, great.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So yes, feel free to do that. So another helpful hint, and I think I've written this in the thing that some churches have done that I thought was helpful to pass along, because again, the membership roles that change all the time, is that at the end of your minutes every month, sometimes people say, oh, we received 3 new members, so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so. We started with this number, and so at the end of the month, we have +3. And so they're keeping a running tab of their numbers in terms of how many folks now are on the active list. And so then again, that's helpful, so you don't have to go back and dig through all your minutes and all that kind of stuff. Same with baptisms and transfers of people out. Oh, we lost 3 people, or so-and-so died. Even if you don't take those deaths off to the end of the year, you may in yourself want to somehow make sure that you make a note of that, because they're really not counted in the active membership list. So, all right, I'm running out of time here, and I just have a couple of things to say. I've already talked a little bit about electronic meetings. On page, here's the annual statistical report. That's what I said comes January 2nd. I mail it all the time. It also tells you how many elder commissioners that your church receives based on our own internal, the Presbytery policy of how many elders you get. And that may change. So please do make note of that. I have a couple churches who keep sending commissioners that they're not eligible to send because they haven't made note of the fact that they've lost the number of commissioners. So please do make note of that. This also has all those reports that Linda was talking about, and feel free to contact the former clerk if you're having trouble with that. They can be helpful. And when your term is done, it's really helpful if you can help the new clerk, especially if you do rotate January to January. Some churches have asked that clerks not be elected until like the summer, so that you're not inundated with all these new things at the beginning of your term. So that's up to your session in terms of when they would like to have the clerk elected. In this packet, we also have a form. It's called the necrology report, and it's basically asking if any elders have died in that previous year, because the presbytery always likes to lift up those names in celebration of the saints who've gone before us. So we really like, and I get some churches that'll call and say, well, you didn't have so-and-so. I didn't get the form back. And if I don't get the form back, then we can't celebrate those wonderful saints' lives. So please be on the lookout for that as well. And again, if you don't get that packet by mid-January, call me. Annual review of session minutes, that's what we just talked about, and then the form. And it is a book of order requirement. And so I did this year, looking at 2020, I've been doing it online. There are several churches that did not. So if your church is one of them, I'm probably going to send out another email with various dates for people to sign up so that we can get that done. Bylaws and manuals of operation. That's in your the packet that I sent to you this morning. It's really important to look at that information, because that has changed in this pandemic. Your bylaws need to now say that you can have meetings electronically. We've all had to scamper because of this pandemic. We did find out that by Georgia, in an emergency, you can go ahead and do it before the congregation formally changes the bylaws. But if you haven't done that yet, then your congregation should vote to change the bylaws that they can have meetings electronically. But you should include, what does that mean? They can call, it can be by, on Zoom. Somebody can call into a meeting. The whole meeting is held online, whatever. And I've put that information in that pamphlet. So that's a new thing that we've had to encounter this year in terms of that. I really do want to encourage all of you to find your bylaws and to look at them. I have sample bylaws in terms of what your bylaws must include. And so if you have any question, feel free to contact me about that and I'll look those over. Consider your bylaws like the structural building, like the structure of your building. But manuals that have policies and have rules, that's the paint and the walls and all that kind of stuff. So manuals are like, if you have a church bus, who can use a church bus? Who drives it? How do you do that? What are your wedding policies? Your sexual misconduct prevention policy, which every church is supposed to have. And every church is supposed to have a policy on protecting children and youth as well. So those are two policies that are mandatory. Your personnel policies, how are people hired? How are people fired? Is that the pastor that can do that? Is that the personnel committee's responsibility? You want to make sure that all those kind of policies are in a manual. And those are things that the session dictates, not the congregation. Those are things that the session creates. And those can be changed year after year after year. But your bylaws are things that are your ultimate structure, and only the congregation can change your bylaws. And so you want to make those broad enough so that they don't have to be changed often, and usually will continue on a regular basis. Phew, and I think we're getting close to the end of the time. After all that real quickness at the end, what other kind of questions that anybody has? Or I hope you're not feeling overwhelmed. Tamara.
Do you have sample bylaw verbiage for electronic meetings or Zoom?
I put it in I do, because the presbytery has it. I put it in that manual that I sent. And it basically says when you can or cannot have an electronic meeting. And of course, we actually did that before the pandemic. And again, it's up to your session. The session may need to decide, can any meeting be electronic? Of course, we're doing that in the pandemic, but they may not want to do that. They may want to say, like, for example, for judicial things in ours, I say for the initial meeting, that has to be in person. It can't be electronically. But so that's your session's discretion in terms of how to do that.
Okay.
But you can see what the presbytery's policy is in that manual. And if you have any questions, let me know and we can look that over.
Okay.
So anybody else have any kind of questions? Are you all feeling totally overwhelmed? I hope not. You know, this really gets easier. The more you do it, it's the kind of thing, the more you do it, the easier it gets. So don't worry. And I'm always available if you have questions. I have people that call me and say, we're having a meeting tonight and I'm not sure how to deal with this issue. I mean, I get questions like that all the time. So feel free. So anything else? Okay. Well, I want to appreciate you taking your time on a Saturday morning. And after you've had a chance to digest things, feel free to let me know if you have any further questions or whatever, and we'll talk about that together. So let's close in a word of prayer. Gracious God, we thank you. We thank you for this work that you have given us to do. It may be not the most glamorous work, but it's important work. And we thank you for your guidance and your wisdom so that we can do this to help facilitate the mission of your church. Because the behind the scenes things are lots of times the things that help the mission of the church to move forward so that we can be the best that we can be. I ask, oh Lord, that you be present with each of these clerks as they begin to embark on this new journey and responsibilities, to give them encouragement and to give them guidance as they go about their work for the sake of their own particular context. Be present with them, we pray. In Christ's name, amen. Thank you. Thank you all very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, all right, guys, take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.